of the world, top of the pop.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Wonder Women podcast, the main podcast for the business magazine for women.com. In our podcast, just like in our magazine, we're focused on promoting women's voices in business, technology, STEM, politics, sports, arts, and culture. My name is Monica Antohi. I'm the founder of the Business Magazine for Women, and I'm also today's podcast host. Today's podcast recording is special because it reminds us that we're all one, that we're all human, and then that we're all in this together. Today's podcast is touching on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by United Nations General Assembly, subscribed to by 193 countries. These goals include things like no poverty, gender equality, climate action, affordable and clean energy, to name just a few of those. And these 193 countries are planning on hitting all of those goals by 2030. For the more complete list and links to the work that's being done, check out at the bottom of the podcast. Today we spoke with Diplomat Claudia Romo Edelman, a force for change and for bringing people together. She's a special advisor for the We Are All Human Foundation, a former special advisor at the United Nations, the International Migration Department. She's a special advisor with UNICEF, former Chief of Public Advocacy, as well as head of public relations with the World Economic Forum. Claudia Romo Edelman is a fierce Latina born in Mexico City that's fighting for all of our rights. We also touched on immigration, on the issues that the Hispanic population is facing and how that affects the good of us all here in the United States and abroad. She's a woman in politics with a big mission, and she just finished work on the latest issue of Marie Claire, a special issue focused on immigration featuring Zendaya. Before we let you enjoy the awesome conversation, we just wanted to quickly mention our Patreon page, though. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, consider supporting us at Patreon, spelled patreon.com/Wonder Women Podcast. Also, a quick reminder that our summer issue is out. Check it out and catch up with all of our Wonder Women in issues 1, 2, and 3 at thebusinessmagazineforwomen.com/magazine. The music again is by composer extraordinaire, email marketing maven, and our very own Wonder Woman of music, Cheryl B. Engelhardt. Go to cbemusic.com to get your free music bundle. That's it for the intro. Let's introduce you to Claudia Romo Edelman and the We Are All Human Foundation.
So let me introduce you to her. Hello, Claudia, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Monica. Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Give us a little bit of a background on who is Claudia Romo.
I'm delighted to be here. There's nothing I like more than empowering women, and having the opportunity to support platforms that empower women is my favorite thing. I started my career as a diplomat. My training is journalism, political communications. I started my career trying actually to bring Mexico into a better light into different countries. And from there, I understood that we're all connected. So I went from a bilateral type of thinking into a multilateral. So I was attracted to global organizations very quickly. You mentioned I worked for the World Economic Forum. That was a fascinating jump into those global affairs. And it was a very special time because we were dealing with the anti-globalization movement. People did not like big organizations that were sort of like behind closed doors in their eyes. And I was somehow an activist from within, because I'm an absolute believer that the world can and has to be fair for everyone. And what a better place to be that within the center of power where decisions happen. So I moved from the World Economic Forum. I was there for 8.5 years, working on PR, special communities, bringing celebrities, sports, like once we dealt with the big issues and opened the doors of the World Economic Forum to the world, we needed to put some salt and pepper to it, so that became a brand that was aspirational, that was embracing. And from there, I moved straight into humanitarian affairs, and that's what I've been doing for 20 years, from refugees, public health, children, working on the Sustainable Development Goals, now on migration, until I took a sabbatical 4 weeks ago to focus on something that I truly believe is going to be probably the next decade of my life.
I can't wait to talk about that because it's such an important mission. The organization that you're about to start, you started, it's got such an important mission, and I can't wait to talk about it. But how did you get into this? How did this happen? What drove you into politics? And it's not necessarily politics. It's bringing the world together. So what was your motivation for this? What were the factors that led you to do what you're doing?
When I was 14, there was an earthquake in Mexico City that shook up the entire city. And we were, at that time, probably like 18 million people, and everyone literally had to go out to save their lives, save their relatives, try to actually make sense of what was happening. And there was not one earthquake. There were like many over days. So it was a panic situation, and everybody had to become a volunteer or rescue worker. And it was the first time in my life when I was moving some of the stones of my neighborhood when I was part of a rescue group, that we were leaving that area, and all of a sudden there was this little voice, and I was not even sure it was a voice, but I was like, wait, we can't leave. I think I hear something. And I was the only teenager. Everyone was a grown-up, and everybody had an urge to actually make sure that we were not missing the big pieces. And I went back, and I started moving one stone after the other until the voice became clear, and I got the attention of someone that came back, and we moved everything. And we all of a sudden there was a movement in which I moved a rock with many other people because it was big, and there were the eyes of this girl looking at me saying like, you got me, right? And that was the first time in my life, Monica, that I felt useful. And that feeling, that sense of that pleasure that it gave me inside out, the blood, circulation that I got from that moment was addictive. And then I realized that's what I want to do for a living. I want to make sure that I get that feeling back of feeling useful and meaningful for someone. And that's what led me to be a humanitarian worker, a social worker, and a marketer for social causes.
That's a very moving story. Dealing with trauma and dealing with that amount of damage around you, it leaves an impact for the rest of your life. But not a lot of people end up going into fields like you have. So it takes a lot of inner strength to do what you're doing, because you're not dealing with easy issues. Every issue that you're dealing with, there's a huge amount of work ahead, and you don't seem to be afraid of any of that.
Oh no, I'm absolutely an optimist. As a fact, that's what led me to create this foundation called We Are All Human, because
that's awesome.
Yes, because we are making progress. The world is getting better. So when people say like, I am a realistic, I'm an optimistic, I'm a pessimistic, I am a possibilistic, because I can see the possibilities. We see it's possible. If you would be a baby girl flying in the sky, any time in history, you choose it, from the Middle Ages to the dinosaurs to the caveman to today, there's no better time in history to be born than today. If you're a girl, there's no other time in which you have had the chances to be voting, to be schooling, to be having access to health and education, and have an opportunity to be happy and fulfilled, having the opportunities that we have and have them for all. So for me, it's hard to be dealing with poverty. It's hard to be dealing with, like gender empowerment. But hey, it's working. I like being part of the winning team, and so should we all. So when we're surrounded by negative news that depresses us, 50% of the people, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, are not reading news anymore, are not connecting to to media sources. One, because it's not related to them. Two, because they find it depressing. And then you might think the world is black, the world is negative. But hey, you know what? There's a great deal of beauty and hope out there, and I am going to make my time and my effort showing it, and showing how there's so many champions making a difference, and how particularly women have the power to change a village. And when you change a village, you change the world.
Absolutely. I saw a lot of I was listening to your podcast on Goalcast. So obviously, Claudia's got she's a co-host also on a podcast, and it's the issues that you guys are dealing with are issues that matter to all of us globally. You're not tackling issues that are, local. Yes, the issues are local, but they affect us all globally. You're talking about poverty. You're talking about global warming. You're talking about, women's issues. So how do you pick the topics? Obviously, speaking from your passion, but how do you pick those topics? How do you?
Oh my God, no. This is the greatest news. So one great news is we're making progress. The second greatest news is we have a framework. We have a plan. And it took 5 years and 193 countries to accept and agree on that plan. But hey, if you're an anal, compulsive, obsessive, neurotic like me, and you love to do lists and you want to actually make sure that you don't forget anything, this is wonderful. We have a plan, and it's called the Sustainable Development Goals. I love them. It's not the United Nations. It's not a piece of bureaucracy, documentation that you can do. This is our plan, and this is the master plan for the future of the people on this planet. But there's no plan B, but there's no planet B either.
I agree,
so
100%.
There's no plan B either, so we better do it. And at the end of the day, what this plan gives me comfort is of three main promises and three main, standing poles, if you want. Mm-hmm. One is that we're the first generation that can eradicate extreme poverty forever. Number two is that we're the last generation that can mitigate the impact of climate change. And the third one, which is my favorite, is that we can actually elevate the playing field for all. So if you're thinking that, if you're thinking that how do you choose the topics, they are there. There are 17 goals laid out for the next 15 years, well now 13 years until 2030, agreed by 193 nations, and that's rock and roll. That's actually a plan. So the only thing I do is just take those pieces out and say, how are we doing what are the challenges that we can tackle? For example, climate change. How do you transform that inconvenient truth, inconvenient solutions, so that we can all sense this is our world, this is what we want to do, and this is how I can affect it. The good news as well is that millennials care. Consumers of the future are so much more into purpose. They will, 66% of Americans, of millennials in America, have said that they will buy from companies that have a heart. And that's not only in America, in India and China, it's around 70%, even in Mexico, 66%. So we have a market that will, that will actually help companies as well to move towards that being better and being more conscious and being a more attractive, not only brand and consumer, but also employer. People will live until they're 150 years old. They will probably want to be choosing where to work, right? You want to work for the good guys. You don't want to work for the evil guys.
You don't want to work for the evil guy, and you do want to work for a company that helps protect the nature, the environment, that, treats the employees better than anybody else, that cares about the environment enough not to buy, a bad product, basically, and push them through for the consumer. But the point that you were just making about, how everything is better. And yes, this is the best time to live as a girl in the world, to be born, and not just a girl, as anybody. How are we making progress on issues that affect women? What are the things that are important in that 17-point plan, and how are we making progress? And no, I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about, globally.
And that is part of I was blessed to have a mentor called Hans Rosling, who used to work very closely with UNICEF and gave us that sense. And if you haven't, I recommend fully to read this book called Factfulness. And he asked a number of questions every time. For example, Monica, do you believe that in the last 20 years, poverty has been halved or has been doubled? What's your sense?
it looks like it's been getting worse, honestly.
All right, so it has been halved. So in the last 20 years, there's half poverty globally in the world. So in average, men of 30 years old have done 10 years of schooling. What do you think is the schooling time for women, 30-year-old women? 6 years, 3 years, 9 years?
6 years.
9 years.
Good job.
9
That's
years.
awesome.
Electricity, global electricity. Do you think that 80% of the world, 20% of the world, or 40% of the world has electricity globally?
I'm hoping 80, but it's...
Yes, you're getting the trend. Every number that I'm going to hit you with is going to say we're getting great. So schooling, for example, for women, it's almost equal to men. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. That doesn't mean that we're, like you have to accept that things are getting better. Well, still you have to do, you have to still, you have room for improvement. And for women in particular, and that is why the Global Goalscast, and thank you for mentioning it, the Global Goalscast is a podcast female-led, where my co-host Edie Losh and I just have an open bias, towards telling the story through girls. So when you're talking about the school opportunities, we're really almost at the level where we want to be in the future, where you have, again, 9 years of, every 30-year-old girl has gone to school. That's pretty amazing. If you can visualize it, that means that if half of a school classroom were to be filled with women, now we're almost there. We're almost like a couple of seats empty globally. That's massive. Well, we have a lot of, that is massive. You have vaccines, 89% of girls in the world have been reached by vaccination. And you have, for example, maternal mortality, which was an incredible indicator of the past of poverty. In the year 2030, you're going to have a convergence point between developed countries and developing countries, and that's really an old way to talk about the world. But in reality, what I'm saying is by 2030, everyone in the world, if you're the richest country, if you're the richest family, or if you're in a poor country, in a poor family, we're going to have the same, which is close to zero. No more mothers dying when delivering a baby. Or, infant mortality, under 5-year-old infant mortality, that's a perfect indicator of the health of the world. And we're really getting into a place where kids can survive up to, kids are making it after 5 years. And that was not a reality 20 years ago. 20 years ago, even now in Latin American countries, mothers don't name their babies until they are 1 year old, because they're scared that if they name a baby, the baby might die and they will actually have an affection, an affiliation. So they wait until the baby is 1 year and name the baby. So imagine that is still a reality now. And in 5 years' time, I wish every mother can name their baby when they're born.
I'm kind of speechless because I didn't know any of that about the South American taking a year to name their child. Yes, infant mortality has been a really big factor for humanity, basically, because lack of medical care for women, not knowing how to actually properly care for a woman, for a pregnant woman, and all of that with vaccines and the water quality and electricity. And you have a podcast that I was listening to the other day about how bringing electricity to this hospital basically reduced the number of mothers dying to pretty much zero, or it was a massive change from women didn't want to go there to give birth to we're going there to have a child because we're not going to die now because there's electricity. So they didn't want to go to this hospital because they didn't have light in the evening, so, at night, so they would die. And those changes push everybody forward, push everything forward. So I was doing an interview last year, and somebody mentioned the Black feminist mission, which is basically by elevating everybody at the bottom. By elevating the lowest of the low, we lift everybody else up. So I'm grossly paraphrasing, but it's the idea that
no, you're perfectly right. If think of it as a mother in your household or as a sibling in your household. If you have if you have the youngest of your family that is sick, you have to stay behind with your child. And you probably won't be able to advance or have as many adventures or as many outings because you have to stay behind with that kid. If you're, I don't know, if you're willing to travel, probably you can't do it as fast or as much because you have to bring everybody up. And once everybody's in the same level, everybody advances, isn't it? It's logical. So what I love is how much progress we're making. What I think I can do is to provide a platform for those stories to be told in a compelling way, because for God's sake, we're so boring in my older world. You know, like we come and talk about like climate change as a da-da-da, or we talk about maternal mortality with numbers. No, what you need to do is use creativity and use mediums like podcasts, like these conversations, and bring incredible music, incredible stories in a compelling way so that people get it, because that's our planet. So people naturally will care about their future and their planet. So for me, having this podcast has been an incredible opportunity, and I invite all your audience to listen to the Global Goals Cast, because it's a partnership made by 12 UN agencies, more than 45 non-for-profits, supported by a number of organizations that want to make sure that we have global, world-class resources to tell a story right. Music donated by Peter Gabriel and Duran Duran, and you can only imagine. But when we come to talk about things that matter, it's not, you see, if you talk to millennials about climate change in degrees in which the water will rise or go drop, or, you know, like on non-human terms, in emotional narrative terms,
right.
it's easier to disconnect. So for example, for climate change, we asked a father and a son that were anyways going to the South Pole whether they would podcast every day in their journey, 60 days, 600 miles, only on renewable energy, talking about, you know, like the wind blowing, the ice breaking, the tension between the father and the son about to lose his toes, the father couldn't make the journey. That's actually the emotional term and you're like, if I'm making that effort going with my son to the South Pole, you home out there, you can make an effort to turn off your light, to eat meat one day a week less. If I am here, you know, like struggling to save my toes, you can do something about your planet, because it's going to come and eat us all. And in this particular story, the father had done already the South Pole before, and this time around, he couldn't finish because climate change changed the nature of the ice and created an ice crust that he couldn't deal with. Yeah. And so the metaphor there is, climate change intervened in a journey that someone already knew. It can come and intervene in our journeys in the future. We have to watch out. But those are the types of stories about communicating progress that I want more people to have and access to and communicate with. So that's why I'm very excited to have this opportunity for this podcast, but it's not, you know, like it's not the only one. So I invite everybody to shine a light in the people that you admire, shine a light on role models, but also be, you know, like be open about like the people that could be doing more, companies that could doing more. Consumers want to know. Consumers want to choose.
Consumers do want to choose, do want to make the proper choices. Investors now, women and millennials, like you were talking about, they're more value driven than ever before. The consumer right now is a lot more value driven. But I wanted to go back to what we were just talking about and stay with the whole global perspective. And let's talk about how we're going to have to become global citizens, basically. Every one of us. It doesn't matter where you're born, doesn't matter where you live. We're all part of this world, and we're all part of making this world better for the next generation or destroying the planet. Well, we're not going to destroy the planet but we're going to destroy it for humans at the rate we're going. So United Nations is a great, platform to think globally, that acts globally, that thinks globally. But how do we, as individuals, start thinking globally? How do we do that?
Everybody has a role to play, and this is our plan, this is our planet, this is our future, and this is our life. So the biggest, and I've mentioned before, I'm an optimist, I'm a possibilist, and I am all for all of that. The biggest concern I have, and the biggest invitation and call to action I would have, particularly for women, is to fight this danger. I see a risk in everything that I've been working on for the last 20 years. I see a risk of getting down the progress we have made, and that is because divisive language is getting traction and getting too much traction from everywhere. Top-down politicians are coming down with this divisive language that, like it's almost like poisoning rain that allows for bad bugs to come out and actually incentivize disruption between the basic concept of humanity. And that's why I'm appealing to women more than anything, because that's us. We're empathy, we're mothers, we're nature, we're embracers. And I'm going to tell you, we're fracturing, we're getting fractured. Social media anonymity allows for the worst of people to come out, because you can say whatever you want and no one will ever know who you were. Technology, through their algorithms, social media platforms are feeding you with the stories you want to hear, the ones that you already agree on. They are just feeding you to support your base ideology. And the world is richer than those little bubbles. So my biggest concern is that if you forget that we all are part of the same human family, if you forget we're all interconnected, we're going to go backwards. You're going to start thinking there's an other out there that I don't recognize and should not have anything that I am accessing to, because the world is of abundance. It's like air. It's not going to stop. It's not that if you have a job, I don't have a job. Like you breathe, I breathe, it's fine. That's the world. We just have to change. We just have to change that fear-based into an understanding that the world is abundance, and there's a big risk of forgetting that we are all connected, that we're all one. So my plea, my call to action, and that's the reason why I set up this foundation called We Are All Human, is to exercise that muscle of humanity and to see people for people, and not to label people as you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're a receptionist, I'm going to treat you one way, you're a CEO, I'm going to treat you another way. People are people, and that feels so good. And once you get hooked into that, you're going to probably start to experiment a little bit more about busting your own bubbles. When you're reading your news only on Facebook and you know that's one trend that is like bubbling your mind, just get out of it for a bit. Just get out of that sense and exercise every day a little bit of that muscle of seeing people for people without losing sight, and try to remember we're all human.
We are all human. So let's talk more about your foundation. It's coming out. You guys are releasing. When are you coming out with it? Is it out? Is it?
No. This is exciting. We partner with a women's magazine, Marie Claire, to do a portfolio on their September edition, where we're going to be yes. So we partner with. I'm gonna say that again because I saw the cleaning lady passing through. We're partnered with a woman magazine, with Marie Claire, for their September edition to have a portfolio that talks about issues that I curated as a special contributor for Marie Claire with them, celebrating humanity, celebrating migrants. And that's actually the way in which we're going to bring to life our foundation. We're All Human. It's happening in September. We're hoping that what we're willing to do is change perceptions and provide content that is allowing for people to have a say in, yes, I actually like humans. I don't want to be intolerant and say like, oh, no, you're from a different political party, I'm going to go and kill you. It's just like we have to have outlets to be able to say, yes, I buy the idea of accepting people. I like the idea of accepting migrants and having different people from different colors being around. And I accept diversity and inclusion. I accept women taking different roles in our society. And I just want to make it easy for people to say, like, here's a shopping list of places where you can be supportive with your dollars. When you're going to go to a restaurant, go shop, go eat in a migrant restaurant, go eat in a women restaurant, very, very strongly focused on Hispanics as well. We're all human. Latinas are my passion, my heart. I am a Latina, and I'm very proud of being a Latina. I think that this country, when I speak about Latinas, I speak about the 55 million of Hispanics. I speak about the 55 million people from first, second, and third generation living in America from Hispanic origins. This is the group that is $1 trillion market opportunity. Latinas create small businesses 6 times faster than any other group in America, and we don't scale up. We have to learn how to scale up, and yet we're not recognized. We're not represented in the media, in politics, in the government, and I took a year off from the United Nations, partly to become the chief marketing officer of this community. No one asked me. I'm volunteering because I think that the skills that I had and the time that I am blessed to have this time around hopefully can help push the needle a tiny bit more. And again, I think that it is not the only group I want to focus on, but I want to start there.
We need to start with women, and we need to start with Latinas. We need to talk about, the Black women as well, because even white women, we as women don't have a strong enough voice presence in the media right now.
Oh yeah.
And the stories that we're being told about the Black population or the Hispanic population are not representative of the entire culture. The focus is on the negative. It'd be phenomenal to see, focus on, on the successes of everybody. And, so instead of picking, media is not necessarily representative of what's happening right now in the world. Because the reason why I started the magazine is because there were no women in business represented.
Yes.
In the media. So we were seeing lifestyle magazines, and we're seeing, men in business suits and, men represented as business people, but you're not showing anybody. Nobody's seeing the women in business.
Yeah.
So that's
You and I have exactly the same motivation, which is to provide a platform for the stories of the role models we want to see in the future. Because we know that if we don't change the narrative, if you don't see it, you don't do it. And so you don't be it. So I applaud what you're doing. I applaud Wonder Woman, and I applaud your business magazine for doing that. I want to see a change in the narrative. Only 9% of advertisement directors are women. Only 14% of film directors are women. And if you think about that, if you think about the consequences of that, obviously, if you're a man, if you're like doing an ad for a car, you're going to put a man driving. Although 50% of the market are women who are buying the cars, you're naturally going to put, and then the woman will be the decoration, having like the sexy leotard on the side, like, yeah, if you're super hot, I'm going to buy that. Those times are over. So we just have to change the directors of those advertisement pieces so that they reflect the reality. Women can buy their own cars, take on a backpack, take on their kids, and go and get the world. And that's the kind of like narrative that I want to be seeing. In the case of Hispanics, for example, it's really tragic because there are three main associations consistently from 2015, 2016, 2017. There's a study done by the National Hispanic Media Organization that says that the three main associations in the media coming from Hispanics, meaning in roles and in websites and so on, is number one, criminal, number two, waiter, number three, pizza deliverer. If I tell you what the reality of the jobs that Hispanics have are absolutely different to those. So, but again, if you start looking at that, you see how is it that we don't have a better representation? Well, we're not showing ourselves. We have to show more leg as Hispanics. We have to show more, we have to find more role models and shine a light on them, give them platforms. That's why I'm applauding what you're doing. Give them platforms so they can actually be seen and shine. And then at the end of the day, take opportunities. I'm doing an experiment that I want to mention to you since you're having a platform as well. I'm doing an experiment with a Chicago publication, the Chicago Sun-Times, on a takeover of Hispanics for the Cinco de Mayo edition. So having like how would Hispanics do a newspaper on one day talking about the issues, right? Like, so it's like trying to get an editor-in-chief, a designer, and different people to do the editorial parts, and ideally having the world for one day seeing through the Hispanic eyes.
That would be phenomenal, and hopefully they'll be talking about how Cinco de Mayo is not really a national holiday.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Maybe we can get away from that and just like accept the fact that we just want to drink tequila one day more than any other day. But it'd be nice to see that. I'm looking forward to the next year's edition. Is that when you guys are planning?
Yes, I do love the Cinco de Mayo. I have to tell you, I'm new to America. I just moved here 4 years ago, and for me, this entire Cinco de Mayo thing was like, what are you talking about? Like, you mean the Batalla de Puebla? And it's like so tiny. Like in Mexico, it means nothing. But I love it because it's like the more holidays, the merrier. Like, bring it on. Do you want to celebrate something else? Perfect. Like, so it's funny. Yeah. My family in Mexico keeps on saying like, so you have Cinco de Mayo as a holiday? And I'm like, yeah, I'll throw a party. No problem.
You're talking about like the image we're having of the Latinas and the Hispanic population in the U.S. and it seems a lot better under the previous administration, and it's getting worse under this one. And we're also seeing because of the changes in immigration law, we're seeing a lot of the crops in California having to be thrown away. Basically, they can't use them because they can't be picked, because immigration is tightening up, and like we're counting so heavily on the migrant population to help with basically everything that we do, including food, and we're losing that help right now, and we're not accepting responsibility for that. Basically, it's a lot. So how do we mediate what's currently happening and also have like a true platform for equality in the country? Because even though they're not legal immigrants, quote unquote legal immigrants, they're part of the system. They're very responsible citizens. And how do we do all those things together?
I'm going to part your question into two, and I'm going to speak about the 55 million Hispanics in America that are absolutely legal, that have been living in America. Probably they speak really bad Spanish, for example, or, or más o menos. But they are like completely integrated into the system, because it's not about like policy or about ideology or being like nice to each other. It's simply about growth. If you're a company, there is no way you can grow without integrating the Hispanic consumer into your mix in a very important way. So beyond any type of measure, the fact that we are as a market so big is that we created ourselves, the Hispanic community created 2 million jobs in a year, that were $1.7 trillion, that our income just like general is $45,000 a year, and just like middle class is $42,000. So we're above the middle class. We're $2.4 trillion in terms of like acquisitive power. So it's just a matter of like a wake-up call saying like, I'm not sure if you're going to let ideology make your business grow slower, but I would actually recommend you pay attention. And Hispanics are bruised. And we have an opportunity right now that we haven't had before because of the attacks that the Hispanic community has had. Now we're going to wake up from our complacency because we were just happy entities, and we're going to start looking at an agenda of unity where you're going to start seeing the real power of the Hispanic community at full life. I think that what we're going to happen, what you're going to see is a Hispanic community getting unified. Stop looking at the differences. I'm Cuban, I'm Venezuelan, and start looking at what can we achieve together. If we think of one, it's like that muscle that you have but you've never used, but when you need it, you're going to exercise it. And now is the time, and maybe because of the pressure of the attacks that the community has had, that we're going to take that opportunity and start really exercising that potential power that we have. Second point on migration. I was part of the Global Compact for Migration, of putting the Global Compact for Migration when America decided not to join that global conversation. That would actually ensure three things: that migration is safe, orderly, and regulated. No one was saying how many people you have to take as a country or not. It's just imagine that you've been playing basketball for 40 years and you never knew what was in or out. No one is telling you, okay, now you have to score 5. It's just a matter of saying like, this is in or this is out, right? And what gives me comfort is that the positive aspects of migration in terms of number are coming out. The migrants produce $7 trillion in GDP per year. That would actually make it $7 trillion migrants make $7 trillion per year. It's 9% of the global GDP. And that means that in terms of what it brings to a country, the normal average of what people stay and what people make and keep in the country is 85%. Yeah. Only 15% of what migrants work go abroad in remittances. Remittances together are more than $500 billion. That is more than 1/3 of all the foreign aid of the world combined. So you take away remittances and you will have to have countries stepping up to help other countries in their foreign aid, for example, Africa, some countries in Latin America and Asia. So overall, I am very clear about one thing. Migration is ancient, is unstoppable, and is positive. I'm also conscious that migration has to be regulated, because once you start, if you don't control it, if you don't put mechanisms, you also have the risk. I'm clear about that. You have to keep the DNA of your societies. Once you add more than 18% of a foreign alien entity to your society, the social tissue starts actually tearing out. So you have to be careful about, and I am very respectful, I'm not saying every country should open borders and just like, no, let's do it in a way that makes sense at the economical level, at the social level, at the rights level, but also, that will continue keeping your national sovereignty. My sense right now is that the biggest concern I have is that migration is not understood, is only feared. And it is related to trust in governments, is related to trust or fear about the pace of innovation and technology, and people not understanding whether robots are going to come and eat up all the jobs that you have, and all of a sudden you don't know where to turn, and you just say yes, you are going to come and take off my job. And overall, I think that one of the biggest gains I think the world will have is in December we'll have a global compact for migration ratified, the same way that there was a Paris Agreement ratified, the same way that there was a Sustainable Development Goals ratified, and through that we're going to have a global framework that at least will give more facts and more common ground for people to make sense of migration as opposed to only fearing it.
And the numbers that you mentioned, that's how we change mentality. That's how we shine a light on what's happening, because without those numbers, all we get are, the media's focus on the bad things that are happening. So if we focus on the good things that are happening, then we can actually see the changes, the positive changes, and we can actually focus on, the positive aspects that are affecting our society. So that is very important on women's issue, on Hispanics, on immigration. That is massively important. So I'm so glad you brought those up. That's like super important.
But mind you, Monica, one thing is in America, there's more salsa sold than ketchup, and there's more tortillas sold than bread. So I get it. I get that the world is getting browner. I also get that the world is getting more feminine and has a bigger heart. So we have to actually be compassionate and try to understand the people that are on the other side, fearing the brownness, fearing the feminine, fearing the hardness, and just try to be compassionate and understand the story. If you're in a town in Texas and all of a sudden you don't find your bread anymore, but you actually have tortillas and your entire recipes for your grandmother are forgotten, or, you start having more tacos than what you used to have in the past, it's scary. So you want to make sure that, I just want us to be all very human in this approach that, yes, it's inevitable, but we're going to deal with it with love, and we're going to deal with it with understanding and providing facts and just making sure that we do it correctly.
I'm very surprised at the U.S., really, honestly, because this country was not white in the beginning. It was native tribes. They're not white. But now, Americans think that the country is white and it should be white, and it's just mind-boggling. But this country was created by every nation kind of giving its citizens and sending its citizens here, and that's how United States is created. It's a massive melting pot, and for us to say right now that no more immigration, we're good, when the whole entire country was created on immigration, it's a little bit ludicrous. But I do understand your point about 18% of something different than yours, than the society, that how that changes. That's a very interesting number. Why 18%? Why not 17? Why not 50?
Yeah, it is around. For example, Jordan has absorbed more than 30% of aliens, or either refugees or migrants or asylum seekers and so on, and it has actually changed the nature of the country. Jordan, you can only imagine that in your town there's all of a sudden all these, I don't know, like Russian coming or Chinese coming, and all of a sudden all the stores are Chinese. You can only imagine that it does change the nature of your DNA. Your social tissue starts getting, diluted. But nevertheless, because they've been very fortunate actually to have neighboring countries that have the same religion, the same language, and the same values. So the adaptation is less harsh in a way. So it's all about the same. It's almost like if you would have Mexico receiving Cubans and Venezuelans. It is a deal, but it's less of a deal than if you have different from different cultures. So those are studies on the 18 to 20% done normally by migration, my offices like the International Office of Migration and Refugees. I used to work for the Refugee Agency, and that's a clear sense of how much of your population you want to have as foreigners. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Who was a big influence in your life? Who is the person that help guide you in your career, and like a mentor or a sponsor in your career that has helped kind of guide you into the path that you're on today?
So the female line, the vertical female line of my family has been like my one pillar, starting from my grandmother, and then my mother, my aunt as well. And these are very, very strong women that have taught me a couple of tricks, the ones that I want to pass on to my daughter, and ideally her to her daughter. And they're somehow basic, led by example, but overall saying like, you as, like as a woman, you have to be an acrobat. You have to learn how to juggle things with grace and actually take into account that, like there are many balls in the air, but you have to deal with them. Number 2 is you have to be a torera. You have to actually see the, see the bull coming and make sure that you confront it, but just like pass it on and let it go and never try to engage with it unless it's absolutely necessary. And the last point I think that I've learned from the strong women in my family is to keep trying. Is never let go, and hold on to your dream and just go for it. I cannot tell you how blessed I am for having had that learning. There are and every time I look back, there's one mentor that led me from leapfrogging me from one place to the other. Like for me, the odds of being Mexican, having worked in Europe for 25 years, Mexican woman, having worked in Europe for 25 years, scaling up the ladder of the non-for-profit world, which is actually very, it's a harder world than you think in terms of like scaling up. And scaling it up, and then being where I am right now, living in New York, having done all the things I've done, it's thanks to all the mentors that were there. And I can really go back to the moment in which I felt they were like, you know what? I have the access code of this door. I'm going to open the door and let you in. And then one door, another. And that's what I want to do. I want to, like I've been in Shangri-La. I was not raised and born in Ivy League schools. I just worked myself through, and I was lucky to have mentors. So I want to be able to share that. I've been to Shangri-La. I've been to places where I've seen how they do it. And I just want to share it. I just want to be able to say like, you know what? I got the access code. Let me open the door and let me open it wider so that even more people can come in.
That's applaudable, laudable actually, because that's the only way we're all gonna grow together, all of us. All right, so we have a second podcast that we're starting called Women 101. So let's talk about how to make women's lives in business better. Specifically, let's talk about how to make Latinas' lives in business better. What pointers do you have for that? For Latinas empowerment is my mission. There's no question that I want to put my mouth where my money is, and that in providing tools, tricks, habits, and empowerment, tips, if you want, for Hispanics, for Latina women. I would say that we, emerging market type of mentality women, like Hispanics, like Chinese, and so on, we really want to, like, we're trained to work harder. That's actually the mantra that we're raised with. And I give workshops on soft skills like public speaking, personal branding, and networking for pleasure and for purpose. So I want to use that because every time I give a workshop on personal branding, my emerging market type of women crack because they never had the time and the opportunity to stop and think, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why? What do I want? Like, what is my brand? What is my Northern Star? What's the mission I have in life? So even though it's a personal branding, as in how am I going to brand myself? You have to go to the DNA and say, like, who are you? What do you want to project to the world? And then the question is like, holy cow, I never stopped
to think, who am I? So for all the Hispanic, my hero ladies out there, I recommend that we start looking at, yes, the time has come for us to recognize we already crossed that border. We already crossed that line of working really, really hard. It is time to stop and think, why am I doing it? Who am I? What do I want to project? And how will I get to it? So that we can just align ourselves and start working towards that goal. If I may, I can give you an example.
Yes, please.
When I joined the United Nations Refugee Agency, I was in charge of celebrities, and so I was managing one of our biggest celebrities, and I admire her tremendously. I mean, like, she's the most carefully orchestrated person I've ever met in my life, and so she's massive. And so when I read her, like, I was giving all these press clippings, and it says, like, like, she kissed her brother in the tongue, and she's wearing the blood in a neck, like in the neck, and she's a sex maniac and totally wild. And I was like, wow, she is our goodwill ambassador. Like, who knew? How are we gonna do this? And I saw an interview she gave saying, where do you want to be in 5 years? Who do you want to be in 5 years from now? And she said, serious, committed, articulated, great mother, and well-hearted. And I was like, big gap, man, big gap, like, from the wild girl, rock and roll, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, to serious, articulated mother, well-hearted, and committed. That was a huge gap. And she said 5 years. And I saw the transformation happening. I saw how Angelina was transforming herself into that. And 3 years after that first interview, there was a poll made among every staff member of our organization and among also stakeholders, so people that were around the agency, and everybody said, like, who do you associate the organization with, and how would you describe them? To your not surprise, of course, Angelina was the adjectives that came for her were serious, committed, devoted, well-hearted, and a good mother. So I think that overall what I want to say is, like, when you put your heart and your eyes into defining who are you, what is your essence, and what do you want to be, is possible. And it's so great to have a guiding light about the most important thing in your life, which is yourself.
Yeah, that's a great example that you use, because we do associate, well, I associate, Angelina with the mission, with what she was doing for you guys. And she was very vocal about it.
But you almost forgot who she was, right? Like, you forgot the blood hanging necklace.
Totally.
And stuff. There you go.
Like, oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
You're right. And she's very, like you said, perfectly orchestrated person you've seen. So, like, everything is very, very well orchestrated. There's no better word for it. So, what drives you? What is your motivation? What's your drive into this world?
Access. I think that I have been blessed with getting access and being part of the room where it happens all the time. For one reason or another, I've been lucky enough to have access, and I want to give it. So I think I was born to be a connector, and I was born to be probably, like, empowering people and pushing people to make the best of themselves and to make it just better. I think that those are the things that drive me. As in, like, even if I'm sitting down, like, okay, this table is great, but what about that one? Or, like, you are my friend and you're doing amazing, but what about that one? Or, like, women in general doing great, but what about that one? So overall, it's just like having and then providing access to that for that to happen. So that drives me. It drives me that I've been blessed with talent that I can't wait to make useful, like, make them useful.
That's awesome. What is your personal brand? Because we were talking about branding a little bit earlier. Claudia, what is your brand?
I think that I would love to be a force for good. I am like 6 feet tall. I'm strong. I'm a force. Like there's no way that you could not, that I could hide that I am like loud and like hair and all of that. So I don't want to deny I'm that. I just don't want to all of a sudden pretend to be tiny and quiet, and I just want to be that force, but I want to do it for good. So my personal brand ideally is a force for good, and like a mentor and an access provider for for people that need it.
Beautiful. Claudia, I have two more questions, and they're a little bit more personal, and then I know I have to let you go quickly. What is your favorite book and to read, and what is your favorite book to give?
So I would actually, right now I'm obsessed with factfulness, so I would actually I read it again and again, and I get the tricks, and I see the jokes, and I see the quizzes, and the book to give for me will be Factfulness again, because this is, for me, transformational. I know, maybe because I know Hans Rosling had it as his mission he was dying when he was finishing this book, and he said, look, I tried everything. I tried visualization, I tried lecturing, I tried advocacy. Let me have this, my last effort to transmit my mission through this book. So
okay, that we're going to have a link to that definitely at the bottom of the podcast. And one last question. You have a billboard, and two things. Where would you put it, and what would you put on the billboard? It's a big, massive billboard. What would be the message you would put on it, and where in the world would you put it?
So just a billboard, like a street billboard, or?
Like a big street billboard, yes.
I would love to have a lot of billboards overall.
We can do that too.
Like overall in the world, I would like to have a lot of billboards in the world. On the final image that I have in my mind of, it's almost like racism being socially unacceptable. The same way that cigarettes went through that trajectory when 10 years ago, the cowboy of the Marlboro was super sexy and you could smoke on the planes, and now it's socially totally unacceptable, and you have to pay legal fees if you smoke in a place that is forbidden. That's the billboard of my life, as in like a smoke-free humanity, like a racism-free humanity, a world where everybody is somehow happy to be alive.
That's a great idea to stand behind, and yes, we should have it on lots of billboards, not just on one. It should be all over the U.S., all over the world, basically, because racism is not a U.S. only situation.
Oh, no.
Is global, and
yeah.
We're racist here about something, and they're racist there about something else, and there's always that issue. And so, yeah, hopefully it's not going to be like that anymore. But Claudia, how can people get in touch with you? Yes.
We have a podcast, the Global Goals Cast. Please subscribe and follow us, rate us, share us with your community, teachers, students, everyone that you think could be an optimism or could actually be happy to hear about champions making a difference. We also have a foundation called The World Human, and stay tuned, we're launching in September.
And we'll have all that included with the podcast as well. But I wanted to thank you, Claudia, very much for coming on today's podcast and being so open about all the experiences you've had with United Nations, with UNICEF, with World Economic Fund, and how that whole situation is affecting all of us, basically, because it's not affecting just the people that work in those organizations, but it's affecting us globally. And I also want to thank everybody that's joined us today. I want to say a big thank you for joining us, and remember to subscribe. And you have all of Claudia's information, at the bottom of the podcast. And that's it. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Monica. Keep doing the great job that you're doing. Keep up with the great job.
Thank you so much, Claudia.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Top of the world, top of the
Hi again, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today. If you like what you're hearing or seeing, make your way to patreon.com, Wonder Women Podcast, and show your support for us so that we can create more opportunities for female founders, women entrepreneurs to be seen and heard and get funded. Thanks, everybody, and remember to subscribe. See y'all next time. Bye for now.